Let me quickly say a quick hello to you, and then we'll start. We'll start with a slide deck that we've used to sort of guide the conversation. But really nice to meet you all, and nice to have so many of you joining us today. And even though it's not quite as fun as being in person, it's nice to sort of see some of your comments in the chat, which we'll keep open during the conversation. So thanks again for you joining us. And if you're here for one reason only. It's not just to hear Jason sing. You're here because you're interested in doing work with the government. And we're going to talk with you today about why we think that's actually a pretty good idea for you to be focused on that today. So why don't we get started? And I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see if I get this right, Jason. It's always funny when you're doing a PowerPoint presentation and you're trying to share at the same time. So let's see if I can do this right. If not, Jason can yell at me here. Can you see my screen, everybody? Okay, great. Well, again, it's really nice to talk to you all, and a pleasure to meet you. Why don't we start with introductions? And again, you've all introduced yourselves to us, so we'll now go ahead and do the same with you. So Jason, why don't you get us started and tell everyone about your incredible background.
I don't know how incredible it is, but thank you, David. Yeah, I'm the former Chief Procurement Officer for the state of Alaska. Came up through public procurement as a frontline agency buyer, so handled and single agencies purchases and RFPs, all of that kind of stuff. Worked up to a statewide contracting officer, and then was appointed into the Chief Procurement Officer role in 2013. Our term, we have a statutory term limit, or a statutory term for the Chief Procurement Officer position up here of 6 years. So I served a term. And in 2019, I joined a company called Government Sourcing Solutions, which David may have had a hand in founding way back in 2005. I joined this team of other former public officials, and we go around and have really good conversations with our former peers in government at all levels, and look for ways that we can be of continued service to them and help them through whatever challenges and initiatives. That's kind of my role. I was heavily involved, in obviously Alaska related stuff, but also there's an association called the National Association of State Procurement Officials, and was heavily involved there. And shortly before my term ended, I was elected president of that association, which was a super proud moment, and just really fun profession and community to be a part of. And luckily I still get to work with David on a regular basis, so I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Jason. And you really are in the presence of procurement greatness with Jason. Definitely not so much with me, but he is among the most respected and well-liked people in our profession. And so it's a thrill and an honor to be able to share the virtual stage with him. So hello everybody, I'm David Yarkin, as Jason alluded to. I'm also a former Chief Procurement Officer. I was the Chief Procurement Officer of Pennsylvania. And while Jason's experience and lived experience involved going through the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, I lived through the after effects of the .com recession in sort of the early 2000s. So we've been through a bunch of these recessions, and we've also had a chance to be on the other side, so to speak, during them as well. So in addition to being the former Chief Procurement Officer of Pennsylvania, today I'm the CEO of a company called Procurated. This will not be a commercial for Procurated, but a little bit about us. So Procurated is sort of like the Yelp for government. It's a place where people in government can come to find the right supplier based on however they're trying to find them. So if they're looking for a company that does catering services in Ann Arbor, all they have to do is come to our site, type in catering, and we'll show you a list of suppliers that provide those services in Michigan or wherever. So it's a place where governments are increasingly coming to find great, highly rated suppliers. We've partnered with 9 states across the country, which we're very proud to have done. And today, more than 52,000 reviews have been written by verified government employees about suppliers. The reason why I think it's a great tool on the supplier side is it really lets your customers be your salespeople and your marketing people. So people in government procurement, we love learning from each other. And there's nothing better for you as a supplier than to have someone in procurement say, this company did a great job for us. We would use them again every time. Someone else in government sees that, and that's worth gold. And that's really what our platform is built to do. And at the very end of the discussion today, we'll tell you a little bit more about Procurated. All right, so let's jump in, Jason.
Sure. So yeah. How can you protect your business in the face of a recession? I mean, David's going to dive into it a little bit more, but we've seen the news about layoffs. Thousands of employees being affected. It seems like a new headline pops up every day saying this company has laid off however many thousands of employees. Some unfortunately by email or text message, which is not always the best way to learn of that, but interest rates going up, and it does create obviously that sense of anxiety, thinking about what's coming, but that's why David and I are here today, is to talk through how you can what steps you can take now to prepare for that. And I know David had cut some slides or some headlines on the next slide here.
Yeah, so recessions are obviously a scary time, right, for a lot of people. If you're part of a company that's made a layoff, it's not just a scary time, it's already become, a really, really challenging time. If I'm a company, a large company or a small company, I'm also worried, right, because my customers themselves are going through hard times. So if I'm selling to Walmart and I see that Walmart is putting out an announcement that they intend to make 15 or 20% cuts in their operational expenses, well, that has to come from somewhere. So yes, they're going to cut people, but the second biggest source expenses for a company is procurement, buying goods and services. And so if Walmart is your big customer, or Target, or any large company, and all of a sudden they're announcing they're going to make huge cutbacks, those cutbacks are going to affect you, suppliers who are selling to them. And for a company large or small, that can have a huge impact for you. So, what does that mean? That sounds like a fairly scary proposition. I mean, that your big customers are going to be cutting back, and you may either see reduced margins, much smaller invoices and spend, or maybe they'll consolidate their spend and use one large supplier instead of using you. All these are very real concerns, and recessions, sadly, are a time when a lot of companies, even really good companies, go out of business. Right? It's a very sad thing, and Jason and I have lived through it before. The good news, and I think it's why you're here, the good news is that there's hope. And just by being on this call means you're ahead of the curve. So speaking of curves, let me just walk you through what's in front of you today on the screen. So we've taken a look at every time the country's gone through a recession. And you can see here, in the recessions are in orange, you can see every time there's a recession, what happens. If you can read this chart correctly, the chart is government spending as a percentage of GDP. And you can see every time the country goes into a recession, sad and scary as it is, what does the government do in reaction? Spends, right? Yep. So the government is spending money, as much money as it can in these recessions. We'll talk about why this one may be different. They're spending as much money as they can to try to stimulate the economy, right? And so while your private sector customers are spending less on goods and services, your prospective customers in the government, what are they doing? They're spending more and more and more. And that's been true in every single recession, not just in my lifetime. I was born in '73. So I dug this up. This is actually an update to that chart. You can see at the far left here, that's the COVID recession. And and the steepness of that government spending makes this look even smaller. this is what happens in a recession. Government spending goes up. So if you're a savvy supplier, and this is an important side, I want to linger on this a little bit longer. If you're a savvy supplier and you know your private sector customers are spending less, and you know there's an opportunity to make up that revenue and more by targeting the government sector, it's probably a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, and I'll just add, just to really clarify and distinguish the two sides. Private sector, they're trying to please their shareholders. They have to take immediate action to show cuts and how they're going to save money and how in the future, where government takes a different tack on that, and they are looking, how can they protect their citizens, how can they protect their economy? And so yeah, the cycle is reversed. They increase spending in the short term and then take on debt on the back end to help fund it, start making spending cuts after the fact. They cut spending after the recession kind of starts settling down, after the economy is stimulated a bit, and then they look at how can they replace the revenue that was taken away by that debt. How can they start bringing in new revenue to offset that debt? And it's very cyclical. I mean, this chart is a great example of how cyclical that is. And it would be interesting. I mean, maybe down the road, we can almost plot this against private. It would be, just offsetting throughout. It would be interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this recession, and we're not guaranteed to be in a recession, right? You all probably know what the technical, Nicole, we'll email you all that this entire spreadsheet, this entire presentation, as well as bonus material, if I can find it electronically. But all recessions are not created equal. And again, there's no guarantee that we're going to go in one. I think a lot of people think we will go into a recession shortly if we're not in one already. But what makes this recession different than the ones in the past is two things. And I'm not an economist, so if you consult your economic advisors. But what's different about this recession compared to the past recessions? Two things. First, in all the previous recessions, at least the ones that I've been a part of, the government unemployment has been high and inflation has been relatively low. And so government's used its spending power to try to stimulate the economy, to create jobs, to try to reduce the severity of the recession on working people. In this recession, as you probably know if you're following it, is going to be caused the opposite reason, because inflation is high, because unemployment is, in the opinion of economists, too low. And so the intention from the Federal Reserve is to raise interest rates, to make companies employ fewer people, to reduce employment, increase unemployment, and in so doing, reduce demand, which will then reduce prices and have a deflationary effect. So you won't see right now the government going out and creating a whole bunch of new programs to try and stimulate the economy, like what happened in the past. It doesn't have to. This is the punchline or the headline. It doesn't have to, because it already has done it. So Jason, I don't know if you want to sort of talk us through a little bit of some of the laws that have been passed in the last couple of years, and how the sort of spigot has already been turned on. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure if you're obviously in business somewhere, you've heard of the ARPA funds. If you work in K-12, the ESSER funds, the CARES Act, all of that. In the past, when we've had a recession, it's been, a slow burn. You kind of see it coming, you start preparing, and then it hits, and then laws are passed. Then, here's the stimulus funding to offset that. But you kind of have a longer runway than what we had with COVID. It hit hard, hit fast. It affected everybody. It affected some sectors super hard. I mean, if you're in hospitality or travel, that was a very hard hit category to be in. And so historically, you had to kind of wait through, see what's coming. It hits, all right, we have some time to respond. COVID required pretty immediate reaction. And so you saw the CARES Act, ARPA funds, ESSER funds, everything going out already and hitting almost like piggy banks. It's almost as if these rainy day funds have already been established, and with some categorization, some requirements around how they can be spent. But that the trickle of spending, it's there. We didn't see huge amounts of outgoing spend by government. I think there's some how can we spend it, how quickly should we spend it, and some questions around that. But it's almost as if instead of reacting to it, we already have this rainy day fund set up and just waiting for the right moment.
Right. And if you look at some of the figures on the screen, we're talking about some pretty big numbers. I mean, the bipartisan infrastructure law is a $1.2 trillion bill. And almost all of that money, in one way or another, is going to trickle down to spending with suppliers, whether it's by the federal government themselves or by passing money down into state and then ultimately the local transportation authorities. If you probably are seeing this, you'll see it even more in the coming months and years, just road construction, highway construction, ports, sewers, schools, and that obviously will benefit you if you're directly in that business, right? In anything related to infrastructure, but even if you're in catering, right? People need to eat, and so any facet of goods or services that you sell, technology, cyber, food, facilities, fleet, anything that whatever industry you're in, there's probably an opportunity to sell to state and local governments and the federal government through the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And even the bill that was passed this last year, the Inflation Reduction Act, doesn't sound like goods and services spend, but $370 billion of that is being spent to fight climate change. And they're using the money to do all kinds of projects all across the country to fight climate change, whether it's putting in energy efficient windows in facilities or putting in electric vehicle charging stations. You can, if you close your eyes, it doesn't require that much imagination to think about how your business can directly relate to these kinds of projects. So just another reason for us all to be thinking about government spending as a huge way to boost your top line as salespeople and running these organizations.
And I mean, that's not to say that government priorities may not shift during a recession and they aim, more towards, one sector than another, and they rebalance their priorities. But it's not as if the government is going to just stop spending altogether across the board. It's kind of they're essential aspects of our day-to-day lives, and their hand in the economy, it doesn't necessarily allow them to a government to just stop spending money.
Yeah, I mean, to the contrary, they're going to be spending money.
Yes,
they're going to have to spend all this money that's already been allocated and is already making its way through the process. And so it really does behoove you all. This is the moment. Next couple of months is the moment to really be making sure that you are doing everything you can to be able to sell into the state and local government market. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get through this.
Yeah.
So really fortunate with Jason here to talk a little bit about personal experience on the front lines, trying to spend this money during a recession. And again, Jason, had a senior role in Alaska during the last major recession.
Yeah. I think, a key thing here in thinking back to the chart you showed that kind of demonstrated the extent to which government spends during a recession. Every recession has a different trigger, and that trigger is what is going to influence those government priorities. So, obviously, when we looked at COVID and look at the priorities there, it was around healthcare, right? And healthcare, PPE spend, all of that in the short term, that was the priority on spend. with, cuts coming, from education and because, there were just the shifts there. So every recession is different. And that's where, you as a supplier really diving into what is the cause of this recession, where can I fit into a response by the government to this recession? That's super important. And so, yeah, thinking back to my time, I was a statewide contracting officer for Alaska when the 08-09 recession hit. And this is, just like recessions, every recession has a different trigger, different response, different, kind of set of circumstances. Every government also is going to have its own, how are they funded? How are they set up to, what's their infrastructure is also going to influence their response and how much they're impacted. And so Alaska, we're a big oil state. 90% of our revenue, in 2008, 2009 came from oil. And so we were fairly well insulated from the general impacts of the recession at that point in time. We weren't taking a big hit on tax revenue. We don't have a state income tax because we're largely oil funded. And so it was an interesting time to still, be receiving some of these stimulus funds at the American ARRA funds, ARRA, American something Act. And so that was passed, and we were, obviously a recipient of some of that funding, and we still had to find a way to distribute it because while the state government wasn't necessarily highly impacted, there were some sectors in Alaska that were impacted more. And that funding came in, and along with it, and that's a different thing, than I think maybe what we're seeing now. It was accompanied by federal level training to procurement officers because it was recognized that procurement officers were vital in the role of distributing these funds. So taught, how to recognize anti-competitive practices, what are red flags of, collusion, and making sure that the money was going out fairly and competitively. And I think just by the nature of how fast the money came in for COVID relief, you saw not as much of that recently. And, hopefully, if we do head into a recession, we have that runway to provide, again, that same level of knowledge and fairness around how the money is distributed. But yeah, so we came in Alaska, because we're oil based, we have what's called the permanent fund dividend or permanent fund, along with the dividend that's generated off the revenues from that. But it's a multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund. And so the Great Recession fairly well compared to other states, but not every state, not every government is going to have that sort of situation set up. And David, I'd love to hear what your experience was around that time.
Yeah. So I'll quickly just go even further back, Jason, to the post.com recession. And my only observation from that was just, it was both a combination of that and also sort of post 9/11. And I remember the state government getting in trouble with the federal government for not spending our money fast enough.
Yep.
I remember that, the governor coming back from a meeting where all 50 states were graded based on how fast they had spent the money from the federal government. And we hadn't spent it fast enough. And I remember he felt like he got a little bit of a black eye from it. And we got a call saying, what's happening there? Spend the money faster, spend more of it, spend it faster. And, if you're a supplier, that's sort of music to your ears. Yep. My experience in 2008, 2009 was different than Jason's because I was on the private sector side. I was actually at the firm that Jason's at today. And so a lot of our work involved consulting for leading suppliers and helping them think through how to themselves get through the recession. And the 2008, 2009 were the two single fastest years of growth in the company's 18 years of history before and after. And it was because there was just such huge demand from the government for for spending on goods and services. And so we benefited from that, as did the suppliers that we worked with. I'll tell you one thing as a strategy that was really pivotal then. I don't know if it'll be quite as important this time, but at the time, 2008, 2009, not only did the government have to, on one hand, spend all this federal money coming down the pike, but on the other hand, they had a significant reduction in tax revenue from companies in their states who were going out of business or just had less revenue. So on the one hand, they had to spend more money. On the other hand, they had to save money. It was a weird sort of schizophrenic world that they were living in. But for us, what it meant, it was really clear that a very strong and powerful message to the governments was, we can help you identify savings as part of our solution. And so to the extent when you go in and talk to governments, if you start to see reductions in tax revenue, that's probably a very powerful way to approach them.
Yeah. One thing I would mention too, just from the government side, when we were getting, these funds and trying to distribute them with some speed behind it, and as a supplier, a great local resource that is called a PTAC, a Procurement Technical Assistance Center. We worked pretty closely with Alaska's PTAC, which was run through our, with help from our university system here. But I was able to go to some presentations where they brought in or invited small local businesses in Alaska to attend these courses to learn how to do business with the state. And that was super, super helpful to just have these really candid conversations about, like, here's where to go to monitor, for bids and RFPs that you might be able to respond to in order to be competitive in getting these funds. Our procurement rules still applied. We still have to, the money is spent fairly and equitably. And so, getting that information out there via the PTAC, and just without our involvement in the PTAC, they are there as a resource every day for our small and local business community to learn, how can I better work with government?
Yeah, and so I know that some of you on the phone are fairly sophisticated and have fairly mature sales teams and marketing teams that know how to sell to government. But to Jason's point, if this is new to you, obviously you reach out to me and Jason, but I did drop a link to the PTAC Association in the chat here. So feel free to check them out and tell them that we sent you. I'm just kidding, they won't know who we are, but just feel free to pop over there. Okay. So Jason, since you're a real expert in sort of navigating the ecosystem and the landscape here in government procurement, and you talk to suppliers all day, every day. What are some of the things that you would, message to them about how to talk to governments, how to develop a strategy?
Yeah, really, at the end of the day, you want to become a supplier of choice. You want to be on the radars of every customer in government that you hope to sell to, and messaging and communicating about what you do. I think there's and for good reason. I think often there's this sense of intimidation that comes with speaking to government, especially procurement. Can be viewed as this, like, what even happens there? What is their role? Why are they in between me and this agency I'm trying to sell to? I will speak for many in the procurement arena. You see our names when we issue an RFP or a bid. A procurement officer's name is on that solicitation, and we want you to reach out to us. In general, we want you to reach out to us and ask us questions about that project, whatever it is. That's kind of an aside from what's here. Becoming a supplier of choice, take down as many hurdles as you can. If you're not familiar with cooperative contracts, that is a way. If you can find a cooperative contract in your category, or a partner or somebody, that you can subcontract with or be a reseller of, or again, it'd be a partner of, in terms of, working through them as a reseller of your services. That becomes a way to easily get into government procurement space without having to respond to an RFP. If you're not familiar with cooperative contracting, basically when a group of governments get together and say, we have a need for the same thing. And so they do one solicitation, one procurement project, award contracts, and then that sustains, all of those participating governments, and maybe even more. There are some governments that can say, oh, I know that, somewhere on the East Coast procured this and they have a contract, I can leverage that contract and not have to, reinvent the wheel. So taking down those hurdles for your customers in government it goes a long way in making yourself appear as a supplier of choice. Again, the investment in your government customers, especially ahead of a recession, gets you on their radar, like I said, and it positions you well to have that conversation. Maybe they don't have a need for what you're selling right now, but to what David has said, that spend is going to happen, that need. And so knowing, again, what's driving the recession, how you can position yourself as a resource to help them through and be able to support what they're doing through the recession is incredibly important. And then, understanding and doing your homework going into those types of meetings and communications with them, knowing what they're, governments all have their unique setups and challenges and initiatives and things that are driving them. Being familiar with that going into the conversation will go a long way.
Yeah, great point, Jason. And someone sent me a message that the slide was cut off, so now you can see the last line in there. Another thing, just to sort of, Jason's point on cooperative purchasing is a really, really good one, and it really has become a very mainstream way for government buyers to buy directly from you without having to go through a brand new procurement process. So learn more about it. Again, feel free to ping Jason and I will show you our email addresses in the last slide. We're happy to talk with you about it. Another thing is, depending on the size of your business, some states now are putting in new processes that allow them to buy directly from small business without going out to do a whole full-fledged procurement. For example, I was in New York City last week, and I learned that in the New York City government itself can send out a bid to just 3 companies for any procurement below $1 million, as long as those 3 companies are small. So you should be out there, engaging with and talking to the government buyers. We'll show you how you can do that with Procure in a minute. But if you're a smaller company, the government is working hard and changing their rules to be able to access your contracts and work with you directly. So don't sleep on that, as they say. All right, so hopefully you all got the point. Sometimes I hit people over the head a little bit too hard, but I'll do it here in case someone came in late or someone was napping during this. We're entering into very challenging financial times, right? Your private sector customers are slowing down their spending, which is going to affect every supplier who deals with them. On the other hand, your government customers are spending more, and they're trying to find ways to reach you. So if you take one thing away from this conversation today, it's that it really does behoove you to take advantage of all the resources out there. And Jason talked about a bunch of them, to be able to work with governments right now as they're starting to spend this huge influx, probably once in a generation influx of money that's coming down from the federal government. And they want to spend it with you. They want to spend it with suppliers of all sizes. And I think now is just a really good time to be leaning into this. And again, for those of you who really understand the government space well, great. Do more of what you're already doing. And for those of you who are newer to it, lean on trusted resources like me and Jason. Jason, before we wrap up and then talk a little bit about how you can use a tool like Procuriate, any other last words of wisdom from you?
Well, this might be a great time to answer. There's a question that popped in about what kinds of everyday products state and local governments usually purchase. And I mean, that is, that feeds into this kind of closing remark really well, is governments buy everything. Really, anything that you could think of, there's a need in government for it. I mean, you think of, everyday products, governments run buildings, facilities, they run prisons, they run juvenile, centers, they run medical health clinics, anything that you can think of. It's very likely that a government purchases it, from office supplies to, up in Alaska, we once needed the services of a transportation company to transport wood bison out into rural parts of the state. So we needed to charge and get some big animals on a train and ship them all out to Western Alaska. So, I mean, anything and everything you can think of, and some stuff you probably never thought of a government buying or needing is on the docket. But yeah, it's all about positioning yourself as a supplier of choice, as a knowledgeable resource to government, ready to help jump in when they are in a tough spot. And when you can take down as many hurdles as possible, cooperative contracts or, anything along those lines, even better.
Great. So Lorenzo Henderson just put a question here, and he asked, can you explain the process or strategies to find and procure some contracts? So Lorenzo, that was I don't know if someone on the procurement and marketing team reached out to you to ask us that question, but it's a great question, and it's a good question for us to start the sort of end of our conversation today with. And it brings me back to Procuriated. So, the way that governments are using Procuriated today, and I want to tell you how you can use it. But if I'm a government buyer and I'm trying to find a supplier to, let's go back to that catering example, to cater, meals for people in my state who are now working on all these infrastructure projects. I come into Procuriated. You can see the screen here. I come into Procuriated, I type in catering, and it shows me the highest rated catering suppliers across the country or in my region of the country. So that's how increasingly governments are finding suppliers, is by coming to places like Procuriated and doing a search. And so for you to show up in search, you'll show up already. But for you to show up better in search, you need to have your profile on our platform be as accurate as possible. So what I would hope all of you would do today, when you got the phone with us, is to go to this website here, procuriated.com/suppliers. When you do, you'll see a nice bright orange button that will say, click here to claim your page. It's free, and I would strongly encourage you to do it. When you do it, you can tell us what parts of the country your company can service, right? So if you tell us, we just service Michigan, fine. Someone from Michigan comes to our site and does a search, they're going to find you. If you can service Michigan and Indiana, but you don't tell us about Indiana, someone in Indiana would search for catering and you wouldn't show up. So get the right geography in there. You can put in your commodities that you sell, goods or services that you sell. So that way, if I'm a buyer and I'm searching for catering, you'll show up if you're there. Now, there are some people that take the mistaken strategy of saying, I sell everything, missile systems and catering. Don't do that. You're going to show up more often than you actually want to. You're going to get people asking you about the missiles that you can sell to shoot down Chinese balloons flying over America. It's not only a waste of your time, it's going to create a bad experience for the user. So I would strongly encourage you not to do that. Put the things that you sell, but don't put more than you sell. Put information about how they can contact you, all those kinds of things. All these things help you when the tens of thousands of people who are in government who are searching on Procuriated come there. They'll be able to find you a lot easier if you do it. And again, it's completely free for you to claim your profile. Now, we also, because we are a for-profit, we do have some additional tools that you can certainly go out and purchase from us. We price them to be very, very economical. And you can reach out easily to sales@procurated.com. And very quickly and easily, someone from our team will get in touch with you and tell you about some additional tools that we have for you to be able to purchase. I do see a couple of questions here in the chat, so let me get to those. The first one, have we added architecture as a search term? I believe that we have. We do have an entire, if you go to our site, you can see, and this is accessible by you right now, you can click on categories and you can see the categories of the major categories of goods and services that we already have listed. I know construction is one of them, and obviously architecture is a big part of the construction process. So I do believe this is included, Nickel, but I'll go back and check with our team, and we'll make sure that we email you personally and give you an answer on that. I know Alex from our team is out there, so Alex, if you could just make a note to yourself for us to follow up with Nickel. Second, from Tamisha Dirks. Tamisha's on the site and has a supplier profile, but it's not completed. Well, okay, that's your job to complete it. Thank you for telling us that. What you can do is go and complete it and make sure that we have everything right. And it's possible, because we get most of our information directly from state governments, it's possible your information is not right. So I would just go in and claim the page. And then once you do, it'll walk you through a process that will help you go and put the right content in there. Where it says contract vehicle, that means the government whose contracts you're on. So if you're on a state of Massachusetts contract, you can click on MA Mass statewide. If you're on Nebraska, you can click, NE statewide. Jason, do you have a comment on that?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to get into the contract vehicle. That ties in nicely to like a cooperative contract. If you happen to have a cooperative contracting award, that's what we would consider a contracting vehicle from the government side. And then, if you don't mind, in the Q&A, we have how valuable is it to be a WEB and or W certified for this work, women-owned small business, or I'm blanking on minority or women business enterprise. And it's, going to be a very typical government answer for me. It depends on your locality and how important they feel that is within their economy and within their, sometimes you see programs built around minority women business owned enterprises, and that's a top priority for that location. And so it would be very very important and valuable to be certified in that. To that might even be a filter that they have in order to respond. And in other localities, that may not be necessarily on their in their top priorities, and it may not preclude you if you're not certified from responding. So that's going to be a case by case. Read through the solicitation, be familiar with your government customer and what their priorities are and what their kind of socioeconomic landscape looks like, and that will tell you how valuable that certification would be.
I will tell you, Jason's right, it's case by case. I will tell you the single biggest trend in my 20 years of doing this has been a greater and greater call by governments to utilize small minority and women-owned companies, and increasingly LGBTQ and veteran-owned companies. It's the single dominant theme in our industry today. Doesn't mean you can't do business with the government if you're not. Obviously, it's been happening for hundreds of years, but there is a particular interest in this from governments, and Procurated responds to that. So we know that many governments will come to Procurated and they'll encourage their users, their buyers, to go and click MBE or WBE or veteran-owned business as a filter at the beginning of their search. So the only catering companies that show up are companies that are certified as small or diverse. Okay, next question, and these are great. Thank you all for asking these. I'm going to pronounce her name, and I'm sorry about doing that. Zingha Mat said, went to go claim their business. They only have their name on it, not the business name. You change that? Yes, just go in and simply claim your page, and you can edit the business name. If you have trouble with that at all, just email me. My email's here, and our team will work with you to get that resolved. Sandra Kelly said, procure to reach my business. Great. How'd you find me? But I did claim my page, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Sandra, for being on this call and for participating on it. We have about 212,000 suppliers in our system. Almost all of them come to us from our partners. Again, we partner with 9 states across the country and an increasingly large number of local governments and schools. And when we do, they share with us the list of suppliers they work with. And so that's probably how we got you. Dale is summing this up and saying, go to suggesting that people go to Procurated to give you credibility. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think, look, we're not the be all end all. We're not the only place where governments go to find information. A lot of them have their own systems already. But increasingly, they are using Procurated, and they're using it because it does something that no one else in the world does, which is we're giving folks in government the ability to cut across governments, right? So Pennsylvania has a very large vendor directory. Maybe there's 100 companies that sell architectural services, but we didn't have a way before this to ask New Jersey or Delaware or Maryland about architects that they've used successfully. And so we enable a sort of a kind of sharing that never existed before in the procurement industry. And I think that's why so many folks in government are coming here to use a tool like this.
Part of that, it kind of, so Procurated is an amazing way to get your name in front of government buyers actively looking for a service, something that you sell. Because to David's point, nothing like this existed before. What did exist was a kind of mess of search engines and vendor directories, nothing tailored for government, nothing that, nothing to check the credibility or the history of a supplier. You kind of were on your own there. What you can do then, so absolutely sign up on Procurated, be out there and, in that ecosystem of government buyers, but you can also monitor, have an sometimes it's called vendor self-service or a vendor portal, something where you can go in and subscribe to procurements and solicitations that they are issuing. And, much like in Procurated, where you select, hey, these are the things I sell and want to sell to government in these locations. When you register or subscribe to a government's e-procurement system or vendor notification tool, you can do the same thing. You can say, I only want to be notified when they are looking for, these items, and you'll get, an email daily, weekly, telling have been issued. And, sadly, there's nothing super centralized for that. Governments, have their own unique systems, place to place. And so it might, if you're working across a state, you might end up having to register on several different types of systems to get that sort of information. There are some aggregation services out there that you can sign up for and kind of have those notices pulled into one spot and delivered. But that's what you can do to proactively kind of go out there and look for what government's needing, where Procurated, you're getting your name out there and saying, hey, look, I'm a business that when you're looking for these things, and, from a practitioner's point of view, we don't often, in procurement, we don't know where our community might be. And so having a tool like Procurated where we can quickly narrow down who it is that would be responsive, super helpful.
Yeah, and also a quick comment, those of you who are still here, most of you are still here. Jason talked a bit about, a couple the way the governments are using e-procurement tools to find you. One thing that's very interesting, and I think will be a continuing trend, is that a lot of these e-procurement companies are starting to partner with us. In fact, I'm putting in the link here in the chat. We're really thrilled that two e-procurement companies, one a company called OpenGov, which is a great e-procurement platform, and another terrific company called Periscope. These are two of the leading e-procurement companies serving the government, and they both partner with us, and we're integrating with them so that their customers can easily find out information about you and your procurated score directly inside their system. So I do want to call out those two e-procurement platforms. If you're working with either of them, they really I think are among the more innovative and forward-leaning and forward-thinking providers out there. And I do know the rest of the e-procurement companies are interested in partnering as well. I think we have one more question here, Jason. Let's see. Oh, we have a comment from Cody who's saying Wahoo, and I echo your Wahoo, Cody. All right, we have 3 more minutes. Jason and I will stay on the line. If you have any particular questions for us, feel free to send us a note. It was really great talking to all of you. Again, you will hear from us following this. And I do hope you do take a second to go to the supplier page of Procurated and claim your page. It's a great way for you to start the journey with us and to make sure that when the tens of thousands of people in government who are trying to spend all this new money, when they're looking for someone to provide these services, they can find you. So I really would encourage you to do it. And again, Jason, I will stay on the line for a couple more minutes. But great talking to you all, and have a terrific day.